Okay, guys, we're back on.
All right. So if y'all look at page 229, it says how the caption job looks. And here they have each period starting a new line. So, I mean, that's just inconsistent from what I had showed you earlier on in the book, but this is the right way. And the FCC rules that came out earlier this year state that we are now to identify speakers. So we have to identify the names of the anchors on the news or the names of the sportscasters on a football game, basketball game, something like that. As long as you know the name, you're supposed to identify them. So everybody's working towards that, and that's just one more layer that they've added to the difficulty of our job, because you have to, most of the time what you're captioning you can't actually see because you're at home and the station is not in your viewing area. So you have to get to know people's accents, people's voices, so that you can change speakers. And I've seen some mistakes, and that's only to be expected at this point because it's really, really hard, especially when the news is going so fast and they switch back and forth real quickly. So the way that you're supposed to do that is upper and lowercase as well. So the speaker ID should be 2 carats, and the name, for instance, Mark, capital M, lowercase ARK, and then your colon. And then all of captioning, for the most part, is in uppercase only. So if you're watching captioning on television, and that's another point, captioning is the term used for broadcast television captioning. We use the term CART when it refers to one-on-one CART with a student in the university setting, or CART on a big screen at a convention where there may be one or more deaf or hard of hearing people in the audience that are looking at the screen. All of the CART now is upper and lowercase. It used to be all uppercase as well, but it's really hard to read all uppercase. So the hard of hearing community has kind of pushed for us to do upper lowercase, which again adds just another level to the skill that you have to have. For the most part, it's what's in your dictionary, and that's fine, but when you come to a word that's also a name, Pat, Bob, you've got to differentiate between those so that you either have a cap stroke before the word so that you can cap the first letter, or you put it in your dictionary a different way. You can use an asterisk with Bob for the proper noun and leave it out for just lowercase Bob. That's where I have the most trouble too, is the upper lowercase. And it's challenging if the job gets too fast, if you have something like Department of Treasury. So department is supposed to be uppercase, lowercase of, and uppercase T for Treasury. So that just adds another layer. And at one point I was like, okay, stop adding things, because we're already looking at all these other things that when you hear a word, you have to decide whether it's peak or peak, and then you have to decide whether it's a capital if it doesn't come at the beginning of a sentence. If they're talking about a famous peak, where you would capitalize that. So just keep adding to our ability to think on the fly. That's really talked about in here as well. I thought they did a good job talking about what it requires, the skills required to do that, think on the fly. In here they talk about having 2 carats and 3 carats, and I think it's kind of funny because when they did a poll of the hard of hearing people, they said, well, I just thought that was a mistake. They didn't really understand that that was a speaker change, nor did they understand that 3 carats meant that they were changing topics. So for instance, if you have 2 carats and they start a story and then they change topics and go to another story, you're supposed to put 3 carats. And that's also an agency preference. Some agencies like for you to do that and some don't. To me, it's more confusing, and especially after I heard that group say we thought it was an error. It's like, well, I'm going to stop doing that because I don't want them to think I'm just making a mistake. But now that's changed a little bit because you're actually identifying the person by name. So that makes it more clear who's speaking if the speaker is off the screen and you can't see actually who's speaking. So also you want to realize that people with a hearing loss can see. So you want to put environmental sounds up there, but you don't want to necessarily put standing ovation, because they can pretty much see that everybody's standing up and clapping. And that's always a confusing point too. I had somebody, I caption the rodeo every year. I think this will be my 18th year. And one of the people said, you need to put standing ovation. They're all standing. I was like, they're not blind. They can see everybody standing up and clapping. So you just want to put environmental sounds in the captioning or the card transcript. And that would be birds chirping, or dogs barking, or laughter, applause, all kinds of things. There's coughing, sneezing, and you have to use your own judgment when to put those in, because sometimes it's not appropriate. And if it means you're going to drop content to put in a parenthetical, you don't want to do that. You want to get the content in there. But also, as soon as you leave something out, somebody's going to talk about it. I remember I was at Trinity doing a class, and there was a dog barking constantly outside. And finally I decided to put in brackets dog barking, because the entire class was distracted by it, and you could tell that everybody was looking. So I was glad that I did that, because then the student knew what was going on. She was in the loop. But if I hadn't done that, she'd be like, why is everybody looking around? And if you don't do it, sure enough, the speaker will refer to it. So, you know, if there's sneeze and cough and stuff like that, the speaker will say, you know, what's going on? Is everybody sick? And then the person who's deaf or hard of hearing has no idea why the speaker just said that. So environmental sounds are necessary, and they're in the FCC rules and regulations that you need to put those in. There's a difference between subtitling and captioning. Subtitling usually refers to a foreign language movie that will be subtitled in English, for instance. So it's a French movie, but it has English subtitles, or vice versa. And subtitles don't convey anything except for the exact translation of what's being said. But captioning is supposed to convey everything that a person could hear. So that's the difference between captioning and subtitling. Normally, subtitling is going to do the job for a deaf or hard of hearing person, and they don't necessarily mind it. But if anybody asks you a question, there is a difference, and that's the difference between that. There's something else that came up while I was discussing that. As far as speaker IDs for a classroom setting, you're going to want to put student and professor. I have a lot of classes where all the students are females, so I don't put female student because it kind of is redundant. But if you have male students and you have female students in the classroom, then you want to note who's speaking, whether it's a male. Probably not, because I don't have that other PowerPoint.
Okay.
If you're in the class and you get to know the other people and you can identify them by name, that's always appreciated by the student. So the more information you can give them, the better. Do any of you guys think you want to do card or captioning at some point? Is that your goal?
It's scary.
Yeah. It's scary. Well, you know, it's like I said, it's just another level. David, while you were out of the room, I was saying they've added upper and lowercase for cards. So now they want us, it's upper and lowercase instead of all caps. So that adds another level.
Oh.
And so that's all it is, you know, you get out of court reporting school. My personal opinion, and it is just that, is that you report for 5 years or so. You get a real understanding of what it is you're doing. And if you want to transition at that point, you've got a lot of terms in your dictionary. One of the things that is really good for the captioners that I work with now, and we're doing some of the offline captioning, a lot of the classes are chemistry, biology, history. They're doing some of the transcripts at this point, and that gives them an opportunity to put lots of terms in their dictionary and be prepared for those classes when they're real-time classes. So, I mean, that's always a good thing to do too, is do some offline transcription work. It doesn't pay great, it doesn't pay what a court reporter gets paid, but I always say you're getting paid to build your dictionary. And if your goal is to do CART, it's a great way to learn about a field while you're not under the pressure and of being on the big screen or providing that service for a student. But I just told David too during the break that I'd been reporting for 10 years and I would have aha moments like, oh, you know, I didn't realize that. I'd been doing it all this time, but I didn't realize exactly what I was doing. And things started to make sense and they would make more sense. And then it's a snowball effect. Once you learn about your software or you learn about how you can write something differently so that it comes out correct the first time as opposed to proofreading it or editing after the fact, it takes a long time. You know, just when you get out of school, you're at the entry level. So you've got a lot of learning left to do. And transitioning is just another level. And the person that I keep talking about, Terry, you know, she's the bar that I set for myself. I keep trying to keep up with her. And at one point, she was instant messaging me while she was captioning. I was like, oh, she just raised the bar. Now, that's what I gotta do. I gotta be able to, I am while I'm captioning. You know, and sure enough, now you saw all the screens. That's what I do. It's part of what you do. It's very distracting. And there are some jobs you absolutely cannot do that in because they're too fast. But, you know, there are some jobs that you hold the sentence in your head and you type what you want to type and then you come back and caption a little bit more. It's all doable. And it's extremely rewarding to caption and to provide CART, especially CART with a student, because they're so appreciative of the information that you give them. And I was telling you I was lucky before because I was in on the beginning of CART and everybody was pretty tolerant. But the same person who thought I was the greatest CART provider and introduced me to the person in Austin, you know, got to a point where if I did make a mistake, oh, she was all over it. You typed in, it was the name Jean, but I typed Jean, I wrote Jean as in blue jeans, and she won't let me forget that to this day. So I started saying, well, that's value added. You got a little bit something extra. Nobody else knew what you were laughing about.
Welcome.
So that's right, you're welcome. But you get to have that relationship with some of the folks. It's a little easier to have relationship with those type of people. I would caution relationships with the students because that never turns out well. That really never turns out well. So, but they would also call me and see when I was available, and that's when they'd schedule their meeting. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool, you know. They're gonna schedule their whole meeting around me instead of, you know, drop everything you're doing, we're having a meeting Tuesday, be there. And I thought that was great too, that they would accommodate me in that way because it was so meaningful to them. I've learned a lot. Let's see if I can see any of these other notes. Do y'all understand the difference between Chapter 57 and Chapter 52 of the Texas Government Code? Chapter 52 pertains to court reporters, and Chapter 57 pertains to court interpreters, not necessarily CART providers alone, but all court interpreters. So, if you're ever asked to do both roles, you shouldn't. You know, if you're in the legal setting and you're certified CART provider level 3, and you're also the official, you can't do both jobs. You shouldn't do both jobs. And it's in our code of professional ethics that, you know, you do one or the other. And the reasons being that if you are a CART provider, your role is to provide communication access for the deaf or hard of hearing person. And that can be the judge, that can be the witness, that can be a juror, that can be the plaintiff or the defendant. So anybody who's deaf or hard of hearing in any of those roles can have a CART provider present. For instance, if it's a juror, then you don't want to, the official cannot go in the jury room and deliberate with the juror. But a CART provider would have to so that they would have communication access. We're working on that right now to iron out all the details. I had worked with an attorney who was also a municipal court judge. And I had gone with him to various trainings because he lost his hearing later in life due to a car accident. And at these trainings that he would go to keep his municipal court judgeship, that's the proper term, he would have to have continuing education. And so I would go, and it would be a 3-day event, and afterwards I would give him a transcript of everything. It was a rough transcript, but it was 99% accurate. And then that would be his notes, and he would read from that. Well, he got into court as a defense attorney representing someone, and he wanted me to play that same role in the courtroom and give him my notes at the end of the day so that he could prepare for the next day. And I was like, I really can't do that. That's not my role in the legal setting as a cart provider. And we got into quite the disagreement, and we agreed to disagree for a long time. And he said that I was discriminating against him because I wouldn't give him my notes. And I said, well, I think what we should do is go to the judge and let the judge decide prior to the event happening. Let's go talk to the judge, and he can tell us what needs to happen. No, you're discriminating against me because nobody else has to do this. If I didn't have a hearing loss, I wouldn't have to do that. You're discriminating against me. We went to another, I was still working for him at the time, and we went to another hearing. And both of these cases I was hired by the court. I was not hired by him personally. I was hired by the court as an accommodation for his hearing loss. And he was in another case, and it was not a court of record, so there wasn't a court reporter at this other place. But I look very much like a court reporter when I'm sitting there with my laptop and my little machine. So the other attorney, immediately after it was over, came over and said, I want to order a transcript. I said, this is not a court of record. I'm not here for that purpose. I'm here as this. No, I'm entitled to everything he gets. I want everything he gets. And I really felt vindicated, and I told him, see, everybody's going to think that I'm a court reporter unless we iron this out beforehand. So I actually didn't work with him much after that because it had gotten heated. Plus, I was concerned that he said I was discriminating against him. It's hard to continue to work with somebody that you feel like, feels like you're discriminating against them. So then there was a meeting where he was a speaker, and there were a lot of hard of hearing people in the room, and another agency called me to provide CART. Had no idea that he was going to be the speaker. So I'm sitting there providing CART, and he's going, and this woman discriminated against me. I'm like, oh my gosh. So that was the last time. I made sure that I never was in a situation with him again. But that's why I've been so passionate working with the legislature to get this ironed out. I want them to recognize CART providers as a different service, even though we look like a court reporter. That's not what we're there for. And I've been working at that for a very long time. So that's why I'm so well-versed in Chapter 57, court interpreters, because I want some specific rules in there that protect the court reporter. The other side of that is, if there's a CART provider that does give their notes, that takes the official out of a daily copy, or an expedited transcript, or a transcript at all. We're the first technology that's been able to provide that. A sign language interpreter, when they come in and they leave, there's nothing left, All they did was they provided communication access right then. So I'm really looking for the JBCC or the legislature to come up with some definite rules so that I don't get pointed at again as being a discriminator. And I kept writing. I was like, yeah, well, I got to write this for the rest of the people to know I'm discriminating against this man. Anyway, but fun times. Any questions? I could tell stories all day, I'm sure. I don't know.
Rachel.
Oh, yes,
I didn't see in my reading, and I'm sorry, it's in the reading and I bypassed it, but I thought that I had seen or heard about, I don't know if you've heard about in the past few years, that the deaf and hard of hearing were advocating to try and make it legally required through the ADA to have YouTube videos closed captioned.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Did that ever pass? And what does that mean? Who pays for that? What do all YouTube videos have to provide closed captioning? How are they going to get enough our providers to
Right.
just cover the
To
sheer
caption.
number of YouTube videos. Like,
Well, yes, there is a rule that all web content is supposed to be captioned. And realistically, that's not going to happen anytime soon because there is so much web content. The law pertains to if it was originally aired on television, then it has to be captioned if they put it on the web. There are other things that they need to make accessible under the FCC. So this isn't necessarily the ADA that is dictating that, but it's the FCC that wants all those online videos to be captioned. A lot of what I'm doing now, the offline portion of captioning that I do, is I do a ton of YouTube videos, and I don't have the right to put the captions on that video. I don't know how many of you are familiar with YouTube. I'm not that familiar with YouTube. My son is, and I get him to rip things that I need to caption for me all the time. I don't know how to do that necessarily, but if you set up the YouTube page and you have the password, you're the only person who has the right to alter that. So I can transcribe it all day long, but that person is the person that's going to have to actually put it on the YouTube video. So I'm actually wondering about that. You know, I have done a lot of, so what I do in that instance, when the universities that I work with have a student that's deaf or hard of hearing in a class, and the professor has links to all these YouTube videos that they're supposed to watch, the university will send me all of these links, and then I just send transcripts back. So now I have this bank of transcripts of YouTube videos that don't have captions, and by law they need to, but they're going to be very lax on that because they realize the enormity of that task. You know, how is that going to get done? But I thought it was very funny. Several years ago, YouTube came out with their own voice recognition so that you can caption your own videos. Well, I was at a meeting, captioning a meeting, and you know, I learned so much when I'm captioning a meeting, and I'm sure this wasn't for public knowledge, but they were selling this to the deaf and hard of hearing people. Click on a YouTube video, turn on our automatic captions so that you can do the work for us, because they didn't have the staff either to automatic caption every YouTube video. So the deaf and hard of hearing people were just ecstatic that YouTube was going to that length for them to get all these videos captioned. Well, it turns out that the captioning is pretty poor, and you know, the voice recognition captioning engine that they have doesn't do a really great job. So they got very up in arms about that and realized that they were being used as workforce to go in there and click on a YouTube video, because once you've done that, then it's there, but somebody has to click on it for the first time. I thought that was hilarious. I just, oh my gosh, they're selling this as such a great thing, but really what they want to do is they want you to do the work. So you go home and do that. So I don't really know how to do that, but anything that's captioned, a lot of times a person that's going to attend something will request for it to be captioned real time as the webinar is happening. We do that all the time. We do a lot of webinars. I think they're supposed to be doing it regardless, but not a lot of people do. I did a really cool thing the other day too. Had no idea what I was getting into, and this was a referral from the Austin company. She was going out of town. She goes, I just got this call from these people. I don't know anything about it, but here, I'm just going to give you this job. All right. Well, it turned out it was the Pope. So I was captioning the Pope from the Vatican. The guy called me, he goes, yes, I'm calling from the Vatican. I was like, the Vatican? Okay. And so I was like, never turned down a job. It was really, really cool. And he was translated, because he speaks in Spanish, obviously, so they had a translator. And it went all over the world. They had a YouTube, I was captioning directly to YouTube live in real time. So I told her, I called her, I said, did you know that was the Pope? And she goes, what? I said, it was the Pope. And she said, no, I had no idea. Next time, ask who it is before you send it. Let's see. I wrote a note here, not a lot of the deaf folks don't consider themselves to have a disability. So don't say that when you're around deaf people, because as far as they're concerned, they're just like everybody else. Yes?
A comment on that. I took American Sign Language. That's the way, I think my ultimate goal is to be a closed captioner writer. So I wanted to take it. So I had maybe just a basic understanding of how they view the world. And my teacher said that when he's around other deaf individuals or interpreters, he feels like a normal person. It's only deaf. It's only hearing people that make him feel less of a person.
Is that, did you take it here? Was your instructor John Cage?
No, I took it from Mr. Parwise.
Oh, okay. I know him, but I don't know him as well as John Cage.
John Cage is also very good.
Yeah. John was instrumental in getting captioning on television for the first time. It was hilarious. I don't know how well you know him, but you guys, if you ever get a chance to meet him, he's a sign language instructor here. In 2000, we had some floods, and the Medina Dam was possibly going to break, and all this water was going to come rushing down the Medina River. And at that time, there was not a TV station in San Antonio that had real-time live captioning for any of their newscasts, much less emergency captioning. And so the deaf and hard of hearing community got together, and they invited all the TV stations to come to their meeting so that they could pitch their idea that they wanted closed captioning and why they needed closed captioning. And of course they called me to do CART, so I'm there with my screen and projector providing CART in front of all the big wigs from all the TV stations. And John Cage puts on a rubber ducky and he stands at the front of the room and he starts signing. And of course nobody had a clue what he was doing. So he got his point across very effectively that I could have drowned, I had no idea that there was water coming, and we need this service. And sure enough, that night I got a contract with KSAT 12, so we do all of KSAT 12's captioning. And of all the TV stations, Greg Simmons was not the one, not the sportscaster that I wanted to write, because he just gives me nightmares just listening to him talk. But we do the best we can with him. So, anyway, a great story. I just admired him so much for coming in and really getting his point across. He did the same thing in front of San Antonio City Council when he was asking for accommodations for to be able to view captioning on council meetings. And he went in there with his rubber ducky and stood up in front of all those high-powered people and got his point across again. So, see if I have any more notes here. We talked about reasonable accommodation. We talked about type well and C print. We talked a little bit about transcripts and providing those transcripts to students after the class is over. Just need to have the proper authorization to do that. In court, if you are providing CART in the legal setting, you are supposed to delete your file before you leave the room, and you're not supposed to provide a transcript to anybody. So, and that's really in our code of professional ethics right now, and there's nothing with any meat that says that we're supposed to do that. But I've only had that one problem, and I've done CART in court quite a few times. And the younger attorneys and the younger judges have no problem with it. The older attorneys, the older judges haven't embraced the technology at this point. Any more questions? Yes?
Do you mind sharing how much you make?
Oh, well, I guess I'm not with TCRA.
Yeah.
I really don't know that I want to give you specifics, but we don't charge by the page, we charge by the hour. So, and that actually says in here, one person says she gets from $25 an hour to $75 an hour in this book. I thought that was quite the range. I don't know who works for $25 an hour anymore. But I always tell people it's pretty comparable to being a court reporter. You know, your hours are just completely different. Of course, there's such a range between an official and a freelance reporter as well. And there's a range in your ability, because there are some jobs that I'm fortunate enough to work on that pay really, really well. Most of my jobs are middle range, and I usually don't take the jobs that don't pay quite as well anymore. You know, for a couple of reasons. I kind of pick and choose the jobs at this point. Since I have my own company, I have the luxury of doing that. And then if you know it's going to be something that is going to be either slower or less technical, then a newer person is probably better for that job. So it's all based on ability. Most captioning companies, in addition to the 98.5% test that they give you, will look at certs. So all of the contracts that I have with all of the different companies that we work for require certification. And that comes from their procurement department, not necessarily from us. But a minimum of a CRR or, it's funny because they say CRR and RMR, and those are so far apart, but at least they're asking for certifications. I appreciate that they're asking for certifications. When somebody calls me, I ask them if they have their CRR and when they got it, because the CRR has changed over time. Back in 2000, when I got my CRR, it was a varying literary 180 to 200 words a minute. It wasn't straight 180. And then it changed to straight 180 across the board. And now the CRR is actually 200 Q&A. So I don't necessarily ask for the CRR anymore because we rarely do anything that's Q&A. We do back and forth, but I don't even have a Q&A bank defined in my dictionary anymore because I never do Q&A. I'm either identifying the speaker by first or last name, and I have a way that I designate the speakers. And or I ask for a CCP, which is Certified Cart Provider through NCRA, or a CBC, which is Certified Broadcast Captioner through NCRA. Now those two have kind of gone away and they're doing the CRC, which is Certified Real-Time Captioner. They've combined the two into one because what we do is so similar. If you broadcast caption and you do news a lot, most likely you won't have any trouble doing CART. If you do educational CART, it's going to be a transition to do news because it's so different and a lot faster, and the terminology is going to be different. There's also Texas CART test, and I don't know if y'all know about the CART certification that Texas Court Reporters Association gives, but it's levels 1 through 5, and there's designations of what, as a level 3 you can work in court, as a level 4 you should be able to work in medical situations, and a level 5 you can do just about anything. So those are the certifications that I look for. I don't remember the question at this point. Something
like what's the range that you could maybe make?
Right, thank you. And so I get there's a lot of companies that will pay based on certifications. So if the more certifications you have, the higher you are paid. And there's two things to think about too with your abilities to do CART. It's not just your ability to write. That's first and foremost. You need to go to a company with the ability to write. You need the ability to learn the different setups that you have to do. And they will be patient for a certain amount of time and teach you how to do those setups. But at some point, they're going to expect that you can do that. And when they feel comfortable that you're going to be able to set up each one of your jobs without asking 700 questions, then they might bump your pay up as well. Because that's really valuable, being able to call up and say, hey, I've got this job. A lot of times it's a last minute job, just like what happened in the day in a life. You have to be able to, at a moment's notice, think through all of the steps that you have to make that particular job happen, whether it's remote or you're going to connect to a webinar. If it's a webinar, is it GoToMeeting? Is it Adobe? Is it WebEx? Is it Illuminate? So all of those things need to run through your head. And those are the people that are going to get the better jobs because they know that they're not going to have to hold their hand all the time to get them set up for that particular job. So I would say, bottom line, it's comparable to what a court reporter makes, but it also is dependent on how much you want to work. As a court reporter taking depositions, if you want to make $120,000 a year, you're going to work 80 to 90 hours a week easy. You're not going to work 30 hours a week and make $120,000. As a captioner, same thing. If you want to make that kind of money, you have to work 40 on-air hours, which if you're on air for an hour, you assume an hour off air to prepare and to have time between jobs and stuff like that. 40 hours on air a week is grueling. It really is. It's a tough week. Not many people can do that, and the people that do it can't do it for very long. It will wear you out sitting that long. Good question. I wish I had a better answer, but I mean, it's based on skill level too. So, is that it? Any other questions? Y'all want to go home?
Any more questions, guys? Ask now. Because you're going to ask me next week, and I'm not going to know the answer.
And my email address is whitney@captionsource.com. Feel free to email me with any questions that you think of.
Please repeat that, I didn't hear.
It's Whitney
Oh, Whitney.
at captionsource.com. Did you have a question?
How do you keep charge of all of your billing if you're working for all these different firms? How do you keep a log or something like that to make sure that your compensation are you, secondary question, as you're considered an independent contractor, so you do your own taxes like a freelancer clerk would do?
Yes. Most captioners are independent contractors. Some do work as employees for larger companies. Everybody that I work with are independent contractors. And based on that status, I mean, they keep getting more stringent on what is an independent contractor. And so far, we've escaped having to have employees. But like I said, with Obamacare actually has affected that. And they want people to be employees so that they fall under that employee status so that they can get health benefits. And as far as billing, if you work for several different firms as a cart provider or a captioner, each firm will have their own sort of process. The way we do it, and this was purely out of necessity, and I really didn't want to do it because it kind of crosses one of those lines, is we have the schedule, and everybody can see their own schedule and what they're scheduled for in a week. And they are supposed to check that at the end of the week and let us know if anything changed. A lot of times jobs will change, especially on-site jobs. You don't know exactly how long it's going to last, and we have a 2-hour minimum, but if it goes 3 hours, then we're going to adjust that on the schedule. And at the end of the week, we will export their week and send it to them for them to approve. So anybody that works for me gets that exported for them. And I think that kind of crosses the line because as an independent contractor, you're supposed to send the bill. It was necessary at one point to do this because some people were really bad record keepers, and it was taking me a long time to match up what they sent me with what they actually did. So I said, okay, we're going to do it this way, and I'm going to send you, and you tell me whether it's right or wrong. And that's worked out really, really well. Some of the firms have that same system or a different system but similar to that, and then some you just send them an invoice. You keep track of your time yourself and send them an invoice. You should always kind of get that up front too, so that you know what the arrangement is. Because it's really, really difficult to keep track of that many people if you don't have a certain scheduling program that allows you to do that. So, but you have to be a good record keeper, whether it's you're an official, you have to be a good record keeper. Freelancers, you have to, and captioners do as well. That's it. Email me if you have any questions or if you
Any other questions,
think of
guys?
something.
Or one thing that I want to emphasize, and I think that you should have gotten out of this class today, is that this isn't a fallback. Okay? Card isn't a fallback. Well, court reporting didn't work out, so I'm just going to do card. I had a student tell me that. You know what? I just don't think court reporting is necessarily for me, sitting in the court, doing depositions, so I think I'm just going to go ahead and do card. That's not it, guys. this, and if you didn't get that from this evening, then you slept through most of it, or whatever, for a couple of hours, because this is taking it up another notch, okay? Totally, okay? So don't think that this was, you know, it sounds pretty easy. I think if you were listening this evening, it's not. It's not, but it's not, and I'm not making fun of Whitney, but or myself, but you know, we're no one special. We just appreciate what we do, okay? And that's what it takes to be a court reporter, and a cart rider is even above that. So it's like, you know what, I want to do the most that I can, and I want to learn the most that I can, and I want to do the most that I can with what court reporting offers. And if that's what you want to do, then cart's for you, you know? Any questions?
Well said. I'm sorry to ask a million bajillion questions. But
I think questions are great
No,
because
yeah.
it goes to exactly what's on your mind.
About approximately, I don't know if you know, approximately how many dictionary entries do you have in your dictionary as I just?
Well, I'm not the best person to ask about that because when I started court reporting, I went to a firm and they just gave me their dictionary. And so I was like, okay. So I started translating with that dictionary, and it stayed with me all these years, and I've made changes to it. But in Eclipse, you can actually go in your dictionary and see entries you've used and entries you haven't used. And there's a ton that I haven't used. And when you're a really good real-time writer, you really don't have to have that many dictionary entries in your dictionary because you can build words. And that's one of the things that you transition from a court reporter into a captioner is you're building the words. You're no longer hearing them and sounding them out and stroking them how they sound. You're hearing a prefix, you write that prefix, you're hearing a root word, and you're hearing a suffix. And you have those defined in your dictionary so that they stick together. So dictionary size is kind of irrelevant. It really is, you know. And then there are those words, like I said, humongous. I have it in there so many times I can't even tell you because that's one that I don't have. You really can't. It's not a prefix suffix type of thing, so you can't use that at all. So you'll have those words, and then you start to write differently too. So instead of writing something in 2 strokes that you can write in 1 stroke, y'all know about briefs. So that's hard. I don't even know how many, honestly, that I have. I haven't looked at that in a long time. But one of the things that you'll learn when you transition to real-time, I know you guys have learned a real-time theory, but when you're actually at the point where you're going to transition and start doing real-time for cart or captioning, is you're going to put word parts in your dictionary instead of the whole word. So if you have a 3-stroke word, you look at each stroke individually and define each stroke to mash together as opposed to globaling all 3 and sticking it in there. Does that make sense, or is that kind of?
I mean, it makes sense, but I don't see how does that work? You know?
Well, and that's just one of those things. We did a class last semester, 7 Steps to Real Time, and we talked a lot about that and how you make that work. Personally, I don't think that you guys need to worry about that. You need to worry about speed, and don't worry about your translation rate. Worry about if you can read through it. You're not doing real time. You're doing, you know, you have a chance to edit it. So when you get to that point after a couple of years and you start seeing patterns, you'll start to recognize it, and you'll go, you know, why do I keep doing that way? That makes no sense. And then you make that change, and then, you know, you see another pattern, and you start to see words differently. You start to hear them differently. And you start to see what word boundaries are. Do you guys know what word boundaries are? Is that something y'all have learned? No? Word boundaries is something that can be a suffix, but can also be a prefix. So, for instance, ER at the end of the word, you want to write that differently than ER at the beginning of the next word, so that the ER sticks to the word that you want it to, not the next word that you're going to write. But right now, if you're reading your notes, you can read through that. So personally I wouldn't focus on that. I'd focus on speed and hearing it and writing it. And then when you get to the point that you want to transition to real time, you can start to look at those things. And it's a process. I mean, 25 25 years, 26 years now I've been doing this. I continue to change my writing all the time. And it's not necessarily to shorten it up, that's some of it, but some of it is just, like, why am I doing that? Why do I continue to do that? It doesn't make any sense. I'm going to do this. So I don't even know what my theory is. Y'all would laugh if you saw it. You know, like I said, some words I just finger spell them because it's easier than to try to come up with a stroke to resolve a conflict or something like that.
And I'm glad that she mentioned that because, you know, I think some of you guys may be more interested in, you know, I need to stroke everything perfectly and everything needs to be perfect. It's not, guys, not at school. It's all about getting out. It's getting out first.
Reading through it.
Yeah.
If you can read through it, it doesn't matter if the ER was supposed to go on the end word or the next word, if you can read it and transcribe it correctly and pass the test. But as long as it's there, I mean, you don't want to be remembering a whole question and drop it and then remember it when you know, that's not really showing you where you're at as far as speed or accuracy. But, you know, don't worry about some of those things. Even though y'all are real-time ready and you've learned a great theory that has put you so much further ahead than any of us when we started, you still have a lot of work to do. And you have a lot of aha moments. I don't know any better way to describe that. And I wish I had a good example, but you know, why am I doing that? Why I keep doing that? That doesn't make any sense. And then I also feel like if you have one of those words that is a four-stroker, but it doesn't cause you problems, don't worry about it. You know, the rhythm is there and you can just stroke it through. Just stroke it through. If it's not causing you problems, don't change it, is my thought. If it takes 4 strokes, it takes 4 strokes. But then there's a one-stroke word that you can't do the finger combination. Figure something else out because it's going to slow you down more than the one that you have rhythm stroking out 4 strokes. Personal?
No, but it's true. I mean, you're talking about 26 years, 23 years, and I'm still doing stuff different. And I think I told you guys that. I mean, in school, I stroked everything out. I didn't hardly use any briefs. So if people tell you, man, you can't do that, you're never going to get out of school. It's not about that, guys. It's not. It's the heart and determination that you have to get out, you know?
That's really true. I mean, we went to the same school and learned the same theory, and I stroked everything out too until I got out of school. And it wasn't until I got out of school that I started to have these epiphanies and decide I was going to write things differently. So, and we got to 225 and passed the test. So, briefs are fantastic as long as they work for you. But don't force yourself to brief something. You can stroke out just fine.
But briefs aren't something that you're like, well, you know what, I need to learn that brief or whatever. Then you hear the word and you're just like, oh, what's that brief? And they're still going. So you're dropping 10 words to get 1 word to try to remember that one brief. That's not when it works. The brief is when it comes like that. That's when it works.
And
there
was also something in the book that talked about that as well. Have a theory for briefing, you know? Come up with your own little theory. I was having some difficulty with transitioning to real time and doing the "igen" ending, like pigeon, and I'm not going to be able to think of another one right now. But smidgen, anything that has that "igen" ending, I do GZ. I didn't learn that in my theory, but I needed a way to differentiate that from the GS, the ishin sound. So I thought, well, I'm just going to do GZ, and works great. But so that was my theory for briefing, anything that ended. So I don't have to think about it because I came up with my own theory. So, you know, random briefs, I see some on Facebook and I'm like, okay, I could never. But it's what works for you too. You know, there's no wrong brief, but there's a lot where I'm like, oh man, that does not help me whatsoever. So I just have to walk away from that one. And I hate words that start with a vowel. Those are I hate them. It's so hard to write those. But we got to write them, so we just do anyway.
And the reason that we got a little bit away from that and that I wanted Whitney to talk about that a little bit is because you kind of hear it from me a little bit, you know, on what you need to do. But when you hear it from somebody else, then it starts really making sense, okay? And that, you know, you're not alone. You're not alone in this thing thinking, oh man, I'm never gonna get this, and I'm never gonna get this. It takes heart and determination, guys, beyond. You have to want this more than you wanted anything ever in your life. You know, and it's funny because I was talking to a student today who got out pretty quick, and I was asking her, I said, how much did you practice? Did you practice a lot? And everybody thought she was just a little phenom or whatever. She said, Dave, I practice 6 hours a day. And it doesn't mean that you have to do 6 hours, you know. But she even told me, she said, you know, if I did 4 hours, I felt like I was cheating myself. And that's not 6 hours with school, that's 6 hours out of school. Okay? That's what it takes. So you think that she got through just, you know, she was just that person. She was just that phenom. No. She was just that person that wanted to get out really bad and get to the end really bad.
What about the mothers who've got kids? 'Cause
And
Right.
that's what I'm saying.
We
6
hear this
hours
all the
doesn't
time.
6 hours doesn't work for everybody.
You know, I mean, I'm just saying because
Sure.
we always hear
Absolutely.
about, you know, 6 hours,
Yeah.
you practice 6 hours, and I mean, that's good.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of her,
Mhm.
that's awesome. But it's like, there's plenty of us, I have a 1-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 12-year-old,
Sure.
I have a husband, I
Sure.
gotta,
Right.
you know, cook, clean, I'm making grocery lists while I'm at school
Sure.
because I have to run
Yeah.
a house.
And you're not alone. You're not alone.
Right.
Yeah, you know, and
You know,
that's-
everybody has stuff going on. And granted, you know, I think that she's single and, you know, whatever, she's young, whatever, but it doesn't matter, guys. It's what you have here. You have to have that heart that, you know what, I have 30 minutes, the kids are down for a nap, I have 30 minutes, get on that machine.
Do you
30
write,
minutes.
Do you write in your head?
Yes, that's a lot of doing that because
Yeah.
I'm
I think that helped me quite a bit. You know, I would write on the steering wheel when I'm driving, listening to the radio. And so it doesn't necessarily, I mean, it's completely different when you're on the machine, but getting the outlines in your head, I kind of believe that, you know, I feel bad. I feel like it may be counterintuitive to tell you some of the things that I think, because I know that y'all have heard other things. But I have always said that it's slowing it down in your head is what makes you get out of school. It's when you can slow it down in your head. Everybody says, how can you move your fingers that fast? You know, you need to be able to move your fingers too, but when you can slow it down in your head and hold on to it so that you can get it down and not panic, that's when you get to that level. For me, that's what worked. And it's such a personal thing. It may or may not work for anybody else, but for me,
writing in the head is it's a visualization for me anyway. I'm a visual learner, and when you do it in your head,
Mhm.
And it never,
you see it, the outline, and you
Right.
automatically.
and it never turns off.
right,
23 years, 26 years, and I'll hear a word and it's like, how would I stroke that?
right.
All the time. So, I mean, it never turns off, you know? So, I mean, don't think that you guys are alone because it's like, oh man, I've just got too much going on. You know? Nobody likes excuses. Just get it done. Anything that you can do. And yeah, I mean, you don't have to be that person that gets out in 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, whatever. You do it at your own pace because you know what? I have stuff to do. I have a family to take care of. I have stuff to do that's outside. But you know what? I can devote 2 hours a day, an hour a day. And as long as you devote that hour and you get on there and it's not messing around, you get on there for that hour, as long as it's good practice, it's good practice, if that makes sense. It's when you're getting on there, it doesn't matter if you have 8 hours in the day and you get on there for 8 hours and for 7.5 hours you're slapping those keys around. You might as well have been watching TV if your head's not in it.
And there's nothing wrong with repetition. I mean, that's exactly what we do. Our job is muscle memory and repetition. So listen to the same take over and over, and you'll start to see word patterns, and you will anticipate the next word in a group. Going to be. That's a phrase that I have, going to be, because it started giving me trouble. It was coming at me really fast, and I was stroking it out. And I was like, that's a pattern, going to be. I hear that that is such a great help to brief something like that. That, and it helped me. It may not help you, but if you listen to the same take 6 times, regardless of how boring it is, you'll start to see patterns, and you'll go, you know what? Every time I get to that point, and you'll start to have anxiety because you'll know that it's going to get to that point where you can't write through it. That's the part you need to focus on. Don't skip over that part. And if you notice that pattern again, that's something you ought to look at. How am I doing that? Why is it giving me so much trouble? That's my personal opinion. I feel like I have to preface everything, right? That's my personal opinion. Because I don't want anybody to say, well, I heard this and I heard that. You know, maybe one thing will stick with you and really help you. But I think that there's a myth about listening to live dictation versus tapes. It doesn't matter. It does not matter if it's live or tape. It might be a little more entertaining to have a live dictation class, but the fact is you're listening to dictation, and I think it's a myth that you shouldn't listen to the same take twice. Listen to it till you've got that thing so good, and you go to the next one, and then all those word patterns that you just mastered in this past one, 3,000 words in the English language are the most frequently reoccurring words. Those are the ones that need to be right there. And then you have an opportunity for that one that's not so frequently occurring. Stroke that out nice and slow, but you've got all these other little ones in your head, and you hit, and you get to the point where you anticipate them. Do any of you do that? You know that the next word is going to be that after they say this or something like that. Once you can anticipate it, that's the name of the game.
Any more questions while she's here?
We got so far off captioning,
I
just
know.
to philosophy.
But I think it needed to be said. You know, I think, you know, it's good, and that you hear it from someone else. So, nothing?
You do the San Antonio rodeo?
Uh-huh.
Where do you sit at?
I sit at section 116.
So you actually sit in the stand, like in the bleachers?
The sound crew, are you very familiar with the rodeo? Where Hadley is on the stage down on the arena floor, up above that and to the right is the sound crew. And they sit in 116 and 117 on the ground level. And I sit with the sound crew.
Oh, that's cool.
Come by and see me.
Okay.
I've been doing it for 17 years. This should be the 18th year if they call me again. And I'm hoping they call me again. We used to have a section that was right there by me, and we would have a LED panel. I don't know if y'all have seen those caption bars, but it's about 5 feet long and 18 inches high, and it has 3 lines of red text like you see at Walgreens when they announce the specials of the day. They moved that section up to the balcony level, and they have 6 seats for deaf and hard of hearing people. But they also are now streaming it using a streaming service. So anybody with their own personal device can go to the rodeo website and click on the link for captioning, and you can just have it on your cell phone, your smartphone. And last year they beefed up the internet access at the AT&T Center, so it worked a lot better. The year before that, it wasn't that great. I'm still working on them because the year before last, you had to go to the website, and then you had, it was about 6 layers in that you finally saw the CC, closed captioning. I was like, oh my gosh, people don't even know to go that far. So last year it was like 3 levels in, and I'm like, put it on the front page. They're not willing to do that. And I said, put it on the Jumbotron. They're not willing to do that.
So I was gonna ask, is it if it's on the Jumbotron, because I've never noticed
No, it's not on the Jumbotron. And they don't put it on the things that go around
Yeah.
the AT&T Center because that's advertising space, so they want to get every dollar they can. All right.
But it's pretty neat because you can go on the computer any night of the rodeo, and
Yeah.
you can.
You can. You don't even have to be there. You can just go on and go to their website and click the CC and watch us caption.
And we were here giving that real-time class or whatever, and we clicked on it and
Okay.
was watching the girl that works for her, watching her do the rodeo that night. It's pretty cool.
And we do the songs and all that stuff. We don't get set lists. Sometimes we do, but most of the time we don't. The country western singers are easy because I'm a country western music lover, and I usually can do that, but
Tejano.
Pitbull could not do Pitbull's and Tejano Night. At one point I said, you know, we're not coming. We're just not going to come Tejano Night because I can't write in Spanish.
Last year it was so hard to hear those singers though. Did
Yeah.
y'all notice that?
Yeah.
Well,
Something was weird with the sound.
I get audio. I have my headphones on, so I get awesome sound. But so I don't know what
The
everybody else.
echo was like horrible.
Valerie.
I've heard captioners talk about pushing text.
Uh-huh.
What does that mean?
That means that you get a script. Bye. No problem. Bye-bye. That means that you get a script for the show, and you're not writing it live, but you're actually sending it line by line to the encoder so that it can be put on the TV screen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. It just, the person who mentioned it made it sound so huge and mysterious.
Oh,
And like, they were the only people that knew how to do it and knew how to teach it. And I thought, well, now, this is something with captioning isn't, even though it's not an easy thing, I'm assuming that the process is pretty much standardized.
it is. It's really hard to go from script to live. I almost would rather do it all live than try to go back and forth between script. Sometimes you'll get a scripted question, so you know that the speaker is going to ask this question, and then you're going to get a live answer to that question. So you have to, it takes a lot of concentration to push the question out and then get on your machine immediately and write the answer. So there's a lot of room for error. It's really not as easy as it sounds. We do a show that we get the show before it goes live, and so they'll send us the audio for the show and we'll transcribe it, and then when they air it live, all we have to do is push it through. That's pretty easy when it's just pushing out the script, because we've transcribed it, we've listened to it once or twice, we know what to expect when they do it live. But the FCC really frowns on that, because that should be captioned in a different way. If it's a recorded program, it should be offline captioned, but a lot of the television stations are doing it because it's actually less expensive to have a real-time captioner do it as opposed to an offline captioner do it. So, because there's so many parts of the process for offline captioning that has to go through. But it can be difficult if you have a scripted portion and a live portion and you're trying to do both. Does that help at all?
Perfect.
Perfect. I don't think it was a perfect answer.
Well, I mean, when I heard it, I kind of got the feeling that it was already a scripted material.
Right.
What they left out was the part about, like you say, there's a scripted question, but there's a live, spontaneous response, and you're going back and forth and back and forth.
And that's what makes it difficult. But if the whole thing is scripted, and if you're the one who did the transcript, and you're the one who's pushing it out, it's pretty seamless. But if somebody gives you a script and you haven't heard the program yourself, that's a little difficult too, because you don't know when to expect the next line and you haven't heard it yourself. And I'm always leery when people give me scripts because they tell me it's a script, but nobody sticks to the script, and it's just sort of an outline of what they say. And so you start pushing it through and you're like, this isn't what they're saying. So then you just switch over and do it real time the best you can. Just another level. Just another level.
Just my opinion.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions, guys? Good class.
Thank you.
Good
I
class.
appreciate everyone's
Yeah.
Thank you for
attention and
coming.
questions.
For next week, I need you to read 9, 10, 11, and 12. I don't know if we'll get through all of them, but we've got to keep moving. So 9, 10, 11, and 12 for next week. Okay? We'll see y'all next week.